A Dark Night in Ba Sing Se. Case 1. A Dark Night at the University. By MuffinLance. Read by My Lost and Found. Chapter 5. Zuko crashes the service windows. Detective Mei Shin sat at his desk, doing paperwork. He would have rather been on a stakeout, honestly, but it wasn't as if they had a dedicated employee whose job it was to file things in the triplicates their government expected. He watched, from the corner of his eye, as the littlest of their refugees slid down from Ryo-Chojio's desk. She padded off to the bathing room, padded back out, checked the cabinet where their tea supplies were kept, looked towards her brother and the other refugees, looked around the near emptiness of a guard station after midnight, looked at him. She drew herself up and marched over with a scowl on her face, like a miniature Lee. "Lee says that Uncle says that you do tea ceremonies," she said. "Can you show me?" Detective Mei Shin got out the station's tea set. He sent her to fill the pot with water, 2 cupfuls, while he lit the little burner with his private spark rocks. He'd had to start carrying them, given that Detective Mei Shin kept confiscating any that might cross Lee's path, as if the boy didn't demonstrably carry his own. No one but Detective Mei Shin could say whether he noticed his own spark rocks being slipped into the little girl's pockets. Those Lee as a Prince papers weren't going to immolate themselves. Ryo stood gazing out over vistages unimagined, his eyes tasting colors he'd never heard before, which made him confident he wasn't the sort of person meant to be in the spirit world. Ever. He turned around. He tried the library's little side door. It was locked, so he put both his hands on it and his foot against the wall and, "If that does work," Lee said, "there's just going to be an angry owl on the other side. We need another way." "That sounds," Ryo-Chojio panted, "very reasonable. Why do you make it sound so reasonable?" They did not, Ryo had recently realized, live in a reasonable world. And it would be nice if the prince would take a moment to acknowledge how not reasonable this all was, instead of looking at Ryo like he was crazy for wanting them to be in instead of out, and then stomping off around the side of the building, while carrying a corpse on his back, leaving Ryo-Chojio alone with, the fox kit said, and went trotting after, leaving Ryo-Chojio alone. "Wait for me!" The spirit library was huge, made up of thin white stone towers capped in domes, completely unlike the sturdy angles of Ba Sing Se. There was a ring of sand extending from the foundation for about 3 paces. Where there was sand, there was sand. His feet were dry, and they sunk in, and there wasn't the feeling of anything else underneath. Just sand. But just past that arbitrary line was a swamp, and the two were touching, and Ryo didn't know how dry sand could be touching wet swamp and still stay dry. The fox kit cocked its head to one side. Then it picked a spot exactly on the diving line and started to dig. Down, 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 its head and shoulders disappearing even deeper as its foxy rump stayed up in the air, one paw kicking out sand and the other scooping up mud. And Ryo got the impression it was curious enough to dig itself into a hole it wouldn't be able to climb out of. Already its hind legs were slipping, barely gripping, just about to go sliding in with the rest of its little body. "Why are you so slow?" Lee scowled, sticking his head back around the side of a tower. The fox jumped out, shaking sand and mud from its fur. Rio made sure to stay on the sand side. The whispering started as they joined Lee around the tower. "Oh no, it's him. Oh no, it's him." It took Rio longer than it should have, and altogether not long enough, to accept that it was the swamp flowers whispering. They were white and as small as the fox's paws. The kit lifted one up to measure, and they might have been something he'd have plucked and taken home to put in his sister's table if they hadn't been talking. "Are we just going to ignore that?" Rio asked. Oh no, whispered the flowers, wilting towards one another. "Fine!" Lee snapped, like Rio had been giving him advice otherwise. He stopped, turned to the flowers, and took in a breath. "Please," one of them begged. "We don't know where the Avatar is." "I don't need the Avatar. I need to leave." "The way you came in." The flowers swayed back upright, as if relieved to have an answer for him. "The way you came in." "The way you..." "You're useless!" Lee snapped. "No," sighed the flowers, slumping over. Said Rio. "They're fainting daisies. Just ignore them." "Like you ignored the water?" Lee frowned. "I drank the water. You can, too." And he held out his canteen. His canteen full of cursed spirit knowledge water. His canteen full of cursed spirit knowledge water that he'd gotten off a corpse that had probably died from thirst. "No, thank you," said Rio Chojio. He eyed the swamp water instead. It burbled blackly. "Don't drink that." "Is it cursed?" "With dysentery," Lee replied, darkly, and continued his one teenager quest to circumvent the library. The fox kit stopped measuring the comparative length of daisy stems versus its tail and trotted after, panting slightly. Lee walked fast. They'd reached a stretch of straight wall. Lee squinted up its side. He didn't share why. Rio kept his back to the building, because the building had yet to display signs of sentience. "So those were fainting daisies," he said. "What if we run into something worse? Like the face stealer or Ko?" Lee asked, and Ro Chojio tried to slap a hand over his mouth before realizing he was trying to slap a hand over the Fire Prince's mouth. But it was fine, because Lee had grabbed his wrist and halfway flipped him onto the ground anyway. So they both had a sort of, "I probably shouldn't have done that" expression. They stepped away at the same time. Lee even helped pull him back upright, which was probably the nicest thing that happened to Rio tonight. "Just pull your shirt over your face," Lee said. "What?" If the face stealer shows up, it's a gimmicky eater." "Don't you mean picky eater?" "So you just need to..." And the Prince of the Fire Nation demonstrated by tugging the head hole of his undershirt up over his face. His short hair stuck out the top, all fuzzy-like. "Then it can't see your expressions, but you can still see it through your shirt." With a refugee's thread count, Rio had little doubt Lee could. "Is that what you do?" Rio asked, because did Lee have procedures for this? Rio hadn't been aware of the need for procedures for this. This was like one of those nightmares where he was back in the university and no one had told the lower ring kid that it was quiz day. "No," said the prince, tugging his head back out, giving Rio a look a lot like his least favorite instructors had. I wear a mask. For just a moment, there was a blur of something white and blue and altogether toothy over the teenager's face. Maybe the daisies would have room for one more, if Rio asked. Maybe that was how new little fainting daisies were born. Stop that! Lee snapped, and picked back up the corpse. The fox kit dangled from its arm for a moment, before dropping back down and giving them big round, "May I please bring this body back to my creepy body and body-related objects study nook?" eyes. Bad fox, Lee said. The kit's ears drooped. What about that water? Rio asked, after they'd spent an indeterminate amount of time looking for the perfect spot of wall for Lee to glare at. He pointed off into the swamp, which was less swampy on this side, with much quieter flowers, and the edge of a clear pond just visible, sparkling in the sunlight despite the lack of sun. Where was this light even coming from? Was this the spirit world's day? And would there be a spirit world night? Or was light a thing he'd assumed would be here now, and now that he was thinking too closely about it, he was going to start doubting, and the light was going to start fading, and it was just going to spiral darker and darker until... There are things bathing in it, Lee said. Ah, said Rio faintly, trying to judge if things really were going dark at the edges, or if he just needed to breathe more. So there are. Hey, one of the things called. Did you find the Avatar? Maybe you could ask the ocean, another yelled. I heard it saw him last. Or the moon, said another, climbing up on a rock to lean over and stick out its spiritual backside, which it shook at them. Though I hear she's a new moon now. The things in the water dissolved into raucous laughter. The Prince of the Fire Nation took a step towards them, and Rio was struck with the horrible feeling that the teen was about to say, "Hold my corpse," and just go punch a moon, as it were. Shut up, the prince snarled instead. The things were laughing as they scattered. Elsewhere, Yue kicked her feet up and kept watching. She'd learned a lot of things since becoming the moon, but her favorite was possibly Schadenfreude. Rio caught sight of himself, 7 years old, sitting at the table as his grandma found the best way to cut the daikon watermelons, and his aunties laughed, and he was between Dad and his sister, and it was a too hot spring day, but Mom had set up her laundry tub as a pool, and all the cousins were down to their underthings. Mom was trying to wrestle Rio back into a shirt, because he burned so easily. He always had. His skin was so much lighter than his sister's, and hers, and Dad's, and he was 7, but he was already very good at putting whispers together into theories, and Rio tripped over a fox kit. The fox kit was staring down into the same perfectly clear, perfectly reflective puddle that Rio had been. Rio watched it a moment, picked it up, turned it around, and set it back down, facing the other way. The fox kit blinked back to itself. It said. Its confusion probably wasn't helped by the body that was staring back at it. The professor's eyes had kind of crept open a little, which was a thing. The prince was splashing in a puddle farther on, his hands balled at his sides. Why were there puddles in the sand, anyway? Shouldn't they be in the swamp? Rio glanced down at the next one. and he was 17 years old, sitting in the scholarship office at Ba Sing Se University. He'd brought a list of all the reasons they should renew his funding for another term, and the man behind the desk was reading it. And why had he brought a list? His calligraphy was terrible. Refugees scribbled trash, and if the man had to stop and puzzle out one more of his characters, Rio was going to die, and the rabbit... The rabbit? Lee had grabbed the rabbit by its neck and was dragging it out of the puddle. It came up, perfectly dry, and stared at them with eyes like silver mirrors. Lee was pale, way paler than just probable Fire Nation heritage pale, and his hand was kind of shaking a little around the rabbit's throat. "It's trying to get you to reflect on your past," Lee said, voice kind of cracking. "As if anyone needs that. It's our past. We were there." "Is this a life lesson thing?" Rio asked. "Are we supposed to learn and grow as people?" "I was only trying to assist you," the mirror-eyed rabbit said. Its ethereally beautiful voice somewhat breathy, what with Lee's ever-steadying grip on its windpipe. "You were trying to eat us," Lee scowled, which was when Ryo Chojio noticed the bones, white as rabbit fur, buried swiftly and shallowly under the sand. "Oh, yikes." The rabbit grinned a toothy grin. "You already eat yourselves. Why shouldn't I?" Then its jaws gaped, popping as they unhinged, teeth yawning wide. Lee dropped it before it could take off his hand at the wrist. It bounded off into the underbrush, laughter receding. Ryo hoped it was receding. "Are you okay?" he asked, because asking, "What did you see?" was... It was just a rabbit of self-reflection, the teen grumbled. Ryo had questions. "Are those ones gimmicky eaters?" he asked instead. "Yes." "What happens when we meet a non-gimmicky eater?" Lee kept walking, after picking back up the professor's body, which necessitated nudging the fox away from it. The fox, wobbling a little, followed after. It whined. "Lee?" Ryo asked, with no whine of his own. "How are we getting home?" "The only way to be sure we can get out where we came from," Lee said, "is to get out where we came from." Which would be that wall inside the library, the one that didn't have a door anymore. Ryo glanced down at the fox kit. "Can't we ask?" "I am not trusting any more foxes," said the fox, still looking a little dazed. "So what are we going to do instead?" "Break in." "All right," said Ryo. "That's... What?" Lee had stopped to scrutinize the wall again, to scrutinize the windows on the wall again. He was looking at one a little lower down than the rest, but still too high to see through. "Do you think you can get to that one if I give you a boost?" "Yes, but..." "I'll get it open." And Lee just started climbing the stone wall, as one does. "Is he Bart's spider hound?" Ryo Chojio said. Said the fox, like it was reminding itself of something. Lee reached the window. Lee started feeling around the casing. Lee took a window to the face as it was pushed open from within and landed on sand with a thump. He lay there on his back for a moment, staring up, much like the professor next to him. Said the fox in the open window. It got the window latch between its jaws and pulled it closed again, and sat, waiting, the shadow of its tails wagging on the wall behind it, for Lee to try again. "Probably not this window," Rio said. It took them a while to find another one low down enough. This time, when the window opened, 2 fox heads pushed out to watch Lee fall. The next one had 3. The next one had 6. Lee took one down with him, but lost his grip when he hit the ground. It went yipping back up to its friends, even less restrained by gravity than Lee was. The window clicked closed above them. This did very little to dim the sound of 6 foxes geckering. "Should we," Rio suggested, delicately, "try a different plan?" Lee rolled over. Lee picked up a rock. "Different plan," Rio urged. "Different plan." "This is a different plan," Lee said. "We're going to make that owl regret throwing us out." This did not involve fewer rocks. Crash! Crash! Yip! "I think you hit." Crash, crash, crash. Screech! Zuko skittered off the sands and back into the underbrush, with only the quietest of slorp splashes. He peered from between the leaves as an owl head snaked its way out the window, beak snapping, as if Zuko was still there to catch. To be fair, it was a better response time than when he'd hit the other wing. "We are going to get eaten," the rookie said, as an overgrown owl absolutely lost it. All the shattered windows really helped its voice to carry. "I will hunt you for sport," it shouted, "and record neither your length nor weight. I will misidentify your bones so badly they will reconstruct your skeletons as quadrupeds. Your hides will go untanned. Your organs will be left to fester inside your rotting flesh sacks. Your genealogies will be mouse-eaten. Your private journals published as an authentic pulp fiction. Where is the rest?" Zuko smirked and took back out his notepad. He flipped past the testimony of the professor's sister, past the whole sheath of torn-out pages, to the next fresh one. And then he wrote. There was a lot of memorization in the Fire Nation curriculum. Important speeches, the treaties between Daimo and Sage that had united the Isles, death poems, and those written by those who'd never expected to die. Not to mention the very complete, very not mouse-moth-eaten, genealogy charts. Zuko had never been a good student. Too much time asking questions on what things meant, because he was too stupid to get it on his own. Not nearly enough time actually learning the documents every educated member of the nobility needed to be able to recite from heart. So it was with great pleasure that he wrote down only those lines that came out most easily into his head, with 0 effort to recall what came next, wrapped them around a rock, and threw them through the windows of someone who cared about completion. Crash! "I will stuff you and lose your specimens in storage. Include attributations or else." Rio was babysitting a corpse. This was the best and least stressful job he'd been given tonight. The professor was an entirely undemanding companion, an expert at staying totally still, and as quiet as crash, crash, as Lee continued his terror campaign against the native wildlife and or cultural institutions. The body was comfortable, apparently, as evidenced by the fox kit that had curled up on its chest. "Are you doing okay, little guy?" Its eyes half opened, then closed again. Its breaths were panting, even though they weren't the ones doing all the running around and petty vandalism. And it was getting a little transparent. Rio poked one of its ear tips, and it wasn't like his fingers went through or anything, but he could see them through it. Crash! "You will be interned with non-complementary artifacts. Number fragments from the same source consecutively." The kit's ears flick-flacked against Rio's hand. It did not otherwise stir. Lee slid back into hiding with them, panting, a lunatic grin on his face. "Are you having fun?" The grin dropped. "I don't have fun." "Uh-huh." The prince frowned down at the fox kit. "What's wrong with him?" It had wrapped its tail tips around its muzzle. They could see its little black nose through them. "He's been out of the library too long," said the three-tailed fox. The three-tailed fox who was behind them. The three-tailed fox who was wearing a Ba Sing Se guard's hat, complete with a beak-shaped gouge fashionably crumpling its top in. "And remembering too much. We are but humble knowledge seekers. We were born of our need for the library, and so to her we are bound. The only other option is returning to our bodies. And, well, you can see how that might go poorly for most of us." Ryo Cho looked down at the fox kit, breathing rapidly, to the professor underneath, not breathing at all. "Oh," he said, faintly. "Yikes." Lee was looking at the same things, and apparently coming to wildly different conclusions. "Can we put him back in?" "Can you rehydrate a prune grape? Experiment with the prune grape before experimenting with my kin, please. He is very young." The silvered fox brushed a paw down the kit's back. Then she looked up at them. "Come, if you'll carry him, I'll show you to the door you actually need. Our master wishes to parley." "Is this a trap?" asked the prince, eyes narrowing. She agreed, grinning. "You," the owl demanded, drawing up to its full height, and then higher again, until Ryo had to admit he had no actual idea of what its full height might be, except that he really didn't want to see it. "You," it repeated, mostly looking at the Fire Prince, "will stay and fix the damage your kind has wrought, that you have wrought, and you will transcribe every Fire Nation document you know," it added, preening its chest feathers a little, like it didn't care about that last part at all. "I have a nice, windowless room for you to work in." In Ryo Cho's arms, the fox kit wiggled and squiggled. It said again, almost urgently. It had gotten in a power nap on their way here, back to the first hall they'd entered, by the wall that should have been a door back home. In the manner of all baby animals, this had somehow granted it more energy than a full night's sleep. It was fully opaque and ready to go on another adventure. Never mind how much Rio needed a nap. "No," said the Prince of the Fire Nation, presumably because the Fire Nation spent 100 years declining to negotiate with anyone. "I already have one unpaid internship. I'm not starting another." "Do not test me, mortal," the fox kit insisted. Okay, shh," Rio said, and set it down, without taking his eyes off the giant owl, who was really more interested in Lee than him. Rio didn't usually like being overlooked, like for interesting cases or promotions, but tonight was absolutely teaching him the appeal in being just a guy in someone else's background. Said the fox, and set its little paw on the wall. Click, said the wall. The owl was in Lee's face, or maybe Lee was up in the owl's, and neither of them were paying attention as Rio just took a little step towards that click, and reached out, and between the pawing of foxy feet and his own fingers, they inched open the door to a dark stairway, through which the muggy air of a Ba Sing Se night cut through the library's archival chill. They were still yelling at each other. Rio could just go. The giant owl hadn't left its library to eat them in the spirit world, so it probably wouldn't leave to eat them in the anthropology department either. Lee would be fine. He liked throwing rocks at owls, literally and metaphorically. And even if he didn't, he was Prince Zuko. Misplacing him a little wouldn't be a great loss for Ba Sing Se. Rio took in a breath and set his foot on the first stair. But he didn't need a rabbit of self-reflection to tell him that he'd just be seeing it again and again if he left the teenager behind in here. "Did you know?" Rio Chojio said, with his eyes screwed shut, which was the best and only way to be brave when you suddenly had the attention of a giant owl spirit. "That there are 437 ordinances in Ba Sing Se's legal code, and that's only the ones we keep on hand in the lower ring guard offices." "I am aware," the owl snapped, "little though I cared." "And did you know how each one of them came to be passed? Because, I've been making a project out of it in my downtime, researching them. I thought maybe I could make a book with the best anecdotes." Because surely he wouldn't be the only one who thought legal code origins would make a good read. "Which would be an original work, something your library has never seen." Rio Chojio squared his shoulders, maybe a little over-squared. Maybe squared them like a turtle clam squares with its shell, and forced his eyes open. "Unless you kill me before I can write it, then you'll never have a copy." There was the complete and terrible silence of calling a scholarly bluff. The owl settled its wings. They did not look smaller afterwards, but they did look sleeker. "If you entered my library as a scholar, prove it. Add to my collection." Rio Chojio had in no way come here as a scholar. Rio Chojio had fallen down a flight of stairs. But he hastily patted himself down, and when something crinkled and he pulled it out, and and returned the rolled-up wanted poster he'd stolen from the owl's collection. Ryocho-jyo winced. The owl narrowed its eyes and ran a wing over the poster, and somehow the slide of not quite sharp feathers over his palm ended with the poster just sort of gone, and the owl looking really judgmental, as owls went. I also have some notes on my desk. Totally original research notes on, contemporary political and social topics. You can have that. The owl said.
All of your notes. I will send my assistants to collect them.
Of course, Ryocho-jyo agreed, sweating profusely. Whatever you want.
And from you,
the owl said, rounding its head, and only its head, back to Lee, who was already holding out the contents of his own pockets. As this consisted of the kid's brand new identification papers, a stack of tea coupons, and 2 spark rocks. Ryo was not entirely sure he understood the assignment. The owl swiped another wing over the offerings. Only the spark rocks were left.
And from you,
it began again.
I will require an autobiography detailing the Blue Spirit's origins.
Ugh, fine, but it's mostly going to be about stealing from Zhao. The owl's chest feathers fluffed up. Its beak hung open. Ryo was struck, horrifyingly, with the impression it was smiling.
I trust it will find a broad audience here, and you will, of course, be honor-bound to complete the transcriptions you started tonight.
Lee narrowed his eyes at honor-bound, for reasons Ryocho-jyo was too tired to even begin guessing at. The owl flicked out a wingtip, where pieces of formally crumpled papers were intermixed with its feathers.
All of them. One for each window you have broken, shall we say, and you will never,
it said, lowering its face down.
Ever.
It shoved its beak a breath from the teenager's nose.
Set foot within a stone's throw of my library again.
I can throw pretty far.
Ever.
The stones of the library trembled. A little bit of dust showered down from the nearest shelf. The owl glanced at it, then to the 3-tailed fox, and the others that had been watching around the edges of shelves and artifact pedestals. A series of in no way helped them hide. One was shoved out by the others, singular tail between its legs, and an owl feather duster between its teeth. It climbed the shelf and set about an overdue cleaning. The owl swiveled its beak back to them.
Do I make myself clear?
Fine, Zuko said, but I want the little fox to be the one that picks things up from me. Asked the fox kid in question, peeking back in from the stairs. He's the only one I know hasn't stolen from me. By default, that the kit hadn't been reborn, yet. But Zuko was an expert at taking what he could get. And he needs to come with us tonight, too. If it's safe for him. The kit bounced.
And why is that?
Asked Wan Shi Tong, his eyes narrowing. Zuko squared his shoulders, like a lion ox, not a turtle clam. So he can visit his family. They should know what happened. That's what knowledge is for.
I will allow this. Be wary of his limits. I am not so pressed for helpers that I will come collect him myself if he overstays.
And, Zuko said, swallowing and glaring, and holding out his mother's play with both hands. He locked his elbows so he didn't pull it back. And you should hold on to this. Make a copy if you want. It's a loan. When I'm somewhere safe, I want it back. It was a Fire Nation play, written in Fire Nation script, with handwritten notes in Fire Nation shorthand. He couldn't have it. Not in the Earth Kingdom. And the three-tailed fox had been right. It would have been destroyed with his ship, or when he'd left the north with only a raft and his uncle, or when Azula had chased them, and even his topknot and the last of his honor had been left behind. You'd better take care of it.
I will take care of the actress's play notes until all who remembered her are dust,
Wan Shi Tong said. Zuko scowled and pulled the book back. It better be longer.
It was a metaphor, human. Yes, I will take utmost care of it.
And I want to be able to borrow it whenever I want.
Get out of my library, human. All further requests should be delivered through the proper interlibrary loan channels.
The owl rested a wingtip on his mother's play. Its weight vanished from his hands. Wait, Zuko blinked in its absence. I can check out more than just...
Goodbye, mortals.
They brought the body to the guard station that had originally requested them for this case. The Dai Li didn't stop them from carrying a corpse several blocks through the middle ring, which Rocho Zhio failed to find reassuring. Li insisted on sending officers to the sister's house, right now, in the middle of the night, like he expected people he brought to guard stations to just disappear. Rocho Zhio helped himself to the station's teapot while they waited. Boiling Ba Sing Se's water before drinking really helped cut down on the curse of dysentery. It was only as bad as the usual government-issued tea leaves made it. The professor's sister arrived. The professor's sister was shown into the morgue, where they were waiting. The baby tied to her chest woke up when her knees collapsed, when she started sobbing. The little fox said, leaping up to nuzzle at her cheeks. The baby had grabbed it, one tail in each chubby hand, and a gummy smile on her face. It repeated, which was a yes, which was, it's me, which was, I'm still here, as it nuzzled up under the baby's chin. Why didn't you come back? She asked, when they told her all they could. It was a long explanation, if nowhere near as long as the night had been. The fox yipped in the direction of Nee's notepad. With a piece of charcoal in its mouth, it very carefully wrote its answer. I forgot. The woman laughed wetly, hugging the kit to her chest. Well, she said, at least you haven't changed. They left the little family alone, for the time they had left, until the next interlibrary loan brought her brother back to town. Or the next self-theft from his own office. Ugh, Ryocho Zhio was going to have to write a report about this. So, Ryocho Zhio said, you did a lot of stealing of Fire Nation documents. Said Lee. As the Blue Spirit, Rio clarified, before the prince could try. The Blue Spirit is a wanted criminal, the teenager said. Which, true. But Rio had seen wanted posters from both nations, and wanted for petty theft and wanted for grand avatar theft kind of balanced differently when it came down to it. Wow, the teenager's shoulders were tense. And he could bend again out here. And Rio was alone with him. Again. He was having trouble feeling as terrified by that as he remembered being. Probably that said more about how the night had gone than it did about the relative threat level of the Fire Lord's children. When I'm somewhere safe, he'd said to the owl spirit, because he was Prince Zuko, and this was the middle of Ba Sing Se. They'd already killed one Fire Nation prince. The prince had just spent his night carrying the Earth Kingdom's literal dead weight around the spirit world. Never mind Rio. Why are you in the city, anyway? Rio asked. There isn't any Fire Nation for you to steal from here, is there? I'm just a refugee, the kid said. Rio believed him. The Blue Spirit is way out of our jurisdiction, anyway, Rio Chojio said. I don't know about you, but I've gone far enough out of our precinct for a lifetime. It wasn't that bad, the kid said. At least we didn't run into any moles of emotional depth. What? I was in that hole for hours. What? The worst part had been coming back to find music night still going. Music night always went as long as it needed to, for Iroh to see his nephew home safe. The sun was just rising as they got back to the station, in pretty pinks and golds somewhere high up in the sky, and shadows that would linger over the lower ring until near midday. First night down? Detective Keishin asked as they came in. Complete, Rio said. Finished. Solved. It was a stakeout. You solve cases, not stake. We solved it. Ha, Keishin said. Good to know that not everything Lee touches is going to be cursed. Junior Detective Lee, the captain said, just coming out of his office. Where is your hat? An owl tried to eat it. An owl. And then a fox stole it. A fox. Yes. Lee scowled, the scowl of the deeply unimpressed. Why are you repeating what I'm saying? Rochojio looked his captain in the eye. Never, he said. Send me out with him again. Never send me out, period. I am going to do paperwork for the rest of my life. Once, he said, someone tells me, he continued, why my desk is on fire. His fellow officers all turned around so fast, it was like they'd never seen anything crazier. Mei Lin put the spark rocks back into her pocket and watched her embers flare. Since she knew about fire safety, she'd put the papers in a stone trash bin first. Since she couldn't read very well, she'd decided to just be thorough and burn them all. Mei Lin had gotten tired of boy talk and turned to arson. This was a relatable childhood experience. Suffice to say it, the captain became even more thoroughly investigated in getting the refugees out of his station. All available officers were put on paperwork assisting duty. Jin saw this representative from her evening of soul-deep embarrassment and thanked the spirits. She got to work, doing what she'd actually come here to do. She'd even managed to talk to him about something that wasn't tea. "Do you need any help?" she asked, as Lee sat scowling down at his own paperwork. "Didn't you finish yours already?" Song asked. "An owl stole them," he said, grabbing a brush. "Same owl that stole your hat?" Taiji asked. Someone at the table giggled. Zuko squinted. She looked familiar. Not one of his refugees, but definitely someone he'd seen before. He filled out page 1 and 2, and he glared back up as recognition hit. "You!" she squeaked. "You're the girl that always wants my opinion on tea. You've tried them all. They're tea." Jin sank her face back into her hands. She'd thank the spirits too soon. Ryo could have advised her not to thank them at all. Uncle came to pick him up. So did Song's mom. They walked in together, which was suspicious already, but it got even more suspicious when Song turned in her completely completed paperwork and slipped her arm through his. He glowered down at it, even as Uncle hoped that his first night had gone well and that he had not deliberately misplaced his hat. She tugged him out the door and down the street, block after block, to his own apartment building. "There was a vacancy," she grinned, her expression twisted a little. "And we didn't exactly want to stay in the other precinct. We just thought we'd feel safer here." He didn't mention how she was only a floor below him. She didn't mention what an easy screaming range that was. Maybe they could get the other refugees in this building, too. Zuko stared up at the ceiling of their apartment. Tap, tap, tap. Hiss. Zuko pulled himself up on the roof. The very pregnant pygmy puma paused mid-swipe. The Dai Li agent crouching over the teacup also paused. They both bolted, in opposite directions, leaving the cup spinning on the roof where they'd been. Zuko lowered himself back into their apartment. Zuko found Uncle's latest teapot, because Uncle always had a latest teapot. Zuko refilled the cat's cup. He set the rest of the pot on the roof across from theirs, complete with its own cup, and went back to bed. This did not reduce the amount of traffic over his own building. Tap, tap, stomp. Zuko went to get his broom. Thump, thump. "It's morning. Let people sleep." Thump, thump. Song was pretty sure she knew why this apartment had been vacant. She peeled the pillow off her face. They weren't totally unpacked, but, there it was. She stared up at their own ceiling, broom in hand, and took aim. "If I'd wanted to hear an ostrich horse stomping, I'd ask for mine back." Meanwhile, Ryo sat at his desk, an empty sheet of paper sitting on top of his report for the night, which was sitting on top of the new burn ring. Ryo dipped his pen. "Observations," he wrote, because he was nowhere near to having evidence. "Library Owl had a poster with other name, called him Blue Spirit instead. Why? Drank cursed knowledge water. What did it do? Anything? Does he still have canteen? Rabbits of self-reflection. Autobiography of Blue Spirit's origin? what does it mean? Rio needed more tea for this. He got up and went to see if anyone had found the spark rocks. A foxy head stuck out from his desk drawer and dragged the paper inside. These were original research notes on his desk, and, therefore, the property of Wan Shi Tong. End case 1. Oh my gosh, this was hilarious. I cannot tell you the amount of times, like just this chapter, where I had to pause my recording and go back and do it again because I just started cackling. Like, seriously, hold my corpse. It was so good. So good. And like I said, this is my first time reading through this, and it's so good. The writing is always just so like clean and put together, and it was perfect. I really, really enjoyed this like next part in this series. This fic was so good. I hope you guys also enjoyed going through all this. I had a really great time, especially doing all the little like fox yips. It's just like I get to be a little creature. It's very fun. And I really liked the idea that the professor got incarnated as a little knowledge spirit instead of just dying alone after like, I don't know, how many days can you be without water? 3 days, but he had a canteen, so like maybe a week. That's just kind of sad, but the idea that he's just a cute little fox now that gets to be a knowledge spirit is very nice, especially since they also introduced a family that he left behind. That was crushing. Oh, but you know, I really enjoyed all of this. I was so not expecting when I started reading this. For case 1, you know, the university, I thought it was going to be like a normal investigation. Zuko's just, you know, a little strange, little feral, competent child. No, straight off, first off, we're going into the spirit world. Because, of course, I love Zuko, like the Zuko that just harassed all of the spirits, so all of them know is that fucking guy. Oh yeah, over there, it's that little creature who just comes around and is like, "Where is the Avatar? I need my honor." And they're just all so sick of him, and they just like pick him up by the scruff like a kitten or a mangy raccoon and just chuck him out, but he keeps getting back in somehow, and he was just throwing all the rocks at Wan Shi Tong's library. That was beautiful, honestly. So funny. And like, the insults that Wan Shi Tong was spewing back at him were so creative and like perfect. It's like, I bet he thought those were the worst possible things in the world. It's being your taxidermy is next to what was like irrelevant things or all the other stuff. It's like I don't kind of want my hide to be processed and my diary at all to be known. But the owl is just, yeah, that makes sense for him. He's very intense. All of this was perfect. I'm trying to remember all of the things I loved about this, but there are so many things I loved about this. And also I recorded the like first 2 chapters 4 months ago. I really wanted to get them all done during, what was it, like it might have been my fall reading week. It is currently January, so it's not fall anymore for sure, but now I'm finally done recording this, even if it took a long while. But yeah, I so thoroughly enjoyed this, just so much. It is always such a treat for anything written by MuffinLance. It's so good, and I am very excited for the next one. So far, it only has 1 chapter, and that was posted back in April. So, you know, it's probably going to be a while before I podfic it, because I'm only gonna start podficking it probably once it's finished. I just like doing it all in one go. And who knows what free time I will have when I get around to that. And who knows when it will be finished, because writing takes forever. But I am very excited for that to eventually come around. I am just fine waiting as long as it takes. And for anyone interested, the name of Case 2 is A Dark Night at the Earth Rumble. And the summary is Junior Guardsman Lee taking the night off. This is fine. Crime laughs. The blind bandit laughs louder. Yeah, I'm excited. I hope you guys have enjoyed this fic in the series A Dark Night in Bossing Say. Case 1, all done. Yeah, if you guys did enjoy, make sure you go into the description, go click on the link to the original work, and leave a kudos, go leave a comment, whatever you can. I am sure the original author appreciates it. Anyway, that is all for this time. I will see you guys next time. Bye! Hello, end me here, because, so I was going back through and adding a little extra zhuzh to my crash sound effects, because, Zuko throwing rocks through the window is it deserves focus. And so emphasis on was using a nice little glass vial jar thing that I used to keep my dip pen nibs in, and I was just kind of like tapping the bottom of my hand to jostle around the nibs to make the sound. And on the very last crash sound effect, the bottom fell off. So Zuko is not the only one breaking glass here. My poor tiny bottle. Where will my nibs go now? Anyway, thought that was a fun little detail. There were casualties in the making of this podfic, and that was my tiny little glass jar. Rest in pepperonis. Yeah.